If you make a mistake, you're making a connection to that specific incident where you did something embarrassing, and now you know, oh, the last time that I said this happened, therefore I should not say it this way, I should say it this way, right?
That is the best way to remember a new word, is to make an embarrassing mistake with it.
Yeah, you don't forget that, yeah. Welcome to the show. As always, I am Tony and
I'm Ryan.
All right, so this is Ichimon Japan. Ichimon means one question. So what that means is we ask one question about Japan every episode. And today's question is, what are your Japanese studying tips? So, both of us have been studying Japanese for quite a while. I guess.
I'm actually curious, how many years have you been in it now? You started younger than me, I think.
Okay, so I got into it when I was in 8th grade.
Wow.
That is like probably 98 maybe. 99, 98, something like that. So I remember going to a Barnes & Noble. This was on, there's a street named Kendall in Miami, Florida.
And good. Now I can find it.
Yeah. It's probably I think it's the biggest Barnes & Noble in the general Miami area. It's probably still there. It's a big 2-floor Barnes & Noble. And I remember finding a book. I'm pretty sure it was called Easy Hiragana. And I had that book for a very long time.
Hard hiragana.
Yeah. Hiragana is like pretty easy, actually.
I guess the old-fashioned cursive style is a little hard.
Yeah. I mean, well, compared to kanji, it's really easy. But, there was just some basic stuff about the hiragana and also just learning words through hiragana. So I learned some very basic stuff through that. But when I was in 8th grade, I had to pick my classes for 9th grade, and being that I already spoke Spanish, I didn't want to choose a language that was, like a Romance language, Italian or Portuguese or French or Spanish. Like, I wasn't interested in that. And they did offer those, but they also offered Japanese. And that caught my attention, being that I was already generally into like video games and some anime stuff. I had watched some, like Dragon Ball and Saint Seiya and stuff when I was living in Peru a couple years earlier. So it just caught my attention and I went for it, and then studied 9th, 10th grade, stopped for a bit, and then started in university again. And that's around that time is when I started getting more serious about it. So what about you? When did you start?
Very similar, maybe slightly later. So my junior high had no language courses.
Mm-hmm.
High school only had the very basic American ones: Spanish, French, Latin.
Mm-hmm.
Is Latin still a popular thing? And if so, why? I don't want to make fun of people who study Latin. But
well, it is. I think it's relatively easy to find in schools if they haven't been cut due to like budgetary concerns. But it's just, it is interesting. I do admit that. But I
should point out I'm actually like a literal linguist. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're both.
I have a master's degree in linguistics. So
yeah. So I do find
you as well. I should point out.
Yeah. Fascinating from that perspective.
Yes,
but
I'm not anti that. It just it seems like an odd choice for a high school education to me.
I don't really have any interest in learning it. I'd rather, and this is me, I guess, just the practical kind of approach. I'd rather learn something I can really use.
I don't want to. I'm afraid now we're gonna have angry comments, but that's kind of what I was implying. Like, I understand the academic study of language perfectly. Yes. I spent years doing that.
Yes.
However, my understanding is high school level languages are usually for practical purposes, that you can travel somewhere, meet people, and no one speaks Latin anymore. It just seems like a weird choice, especially when there's languages such as Japanese, Chinese that are very, very rare. For example, my high school didn't have either.
Yeah. But, hey, we all have our like nerdy things, so,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So anyway,
when I started university, I I changed majors a lot. I was originally a computer science and then kind of math and then film.
Mm.
I actually had a double major eventually with Japanese and film, but I
Mm.
didn't actually start Japanese till my third year.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to you, in high school I had studied Spanish, so I wanted to do something new
Mm-hmm.
and something that was kind of more unique because basically everyone I knew was doing Spanish or French. So
Yeah,
I
and
chose.
you were in California, so I mean,
Yeah.
plenty of chances to practice Spanish too, right?
So the one
At
I
least
chose,
through
of course, was Korean. Well, I really did actually. At the time, I was in studying, practicing Taekwondo,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do Korean. But my university had a fairly large Korean American population,
Mm-hmm.
so they had a requirement to take a placement test before you could join any Korean class because they didn't want people who could already speak it fluently, just like joining 101 to cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't want to bother with that. I guess I'll take Japanese instead
Yeah.
because it didn't have a required test.
Right.
But it ended up working out well because literally in the first week, I just fell in love with the class and quickly changed my major to be double major film in Japanese.
So
Moved to
what,
Japan, went to graduate school in Japanese, and now moved back to Japan again.
Yeah. So what caught your attention about the language? Why did you like it so much?
So at the time, I didn't know I had an underlying interest in linguistics because
Mm-hmm.
at least where I grew up, there was no linguistics classes anywhere up until university. But I liked the sound of it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fascinated by the fact that the grammatical order was different. So English is subject, verb, object, I eat cake. Japanese is subject, object, verb, I cake, eat.
Mm.
And it had never occurred to me that you could vary something in a language like that, even though actually that grouping is the biggest grouping of all linguistic families.
Right.
But seeing something completely different from English and also the sound system I liked just made it interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think in high school, all of my Spanish teachers tried to make Spanish seem easier by trying to portray it as very similar to English, just replacing words, which is not a good way to teach Spanish because
Nope.
it's very, very different from English.
Yeah.
But with Japanese, the teachers couldn't make that kind of claim because it's fundamentally so different. So it was
Yeah.
like, don't think in English, just start over from scratch.
Yep.
And I think that approach worked much better for me and made it much more interesting for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess let's start with what did you find the language difficult at the beginning?
I'm afraid to say this, but honestly, not really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was easy, but my interest and passion for it was so high
Yeah.
that anytime there was something strange or confusing, it would be fun for me to try to figure out like what's going on and how to understand it. And then like I would always try to like whenever I encountered something weird, I would try to understand it and then try to make my own sentences using whatever that thing was and ask my teacher like, "Oh, did I get this right?" And sometimes I got it wrong, but a lot of times I got it right, and it was a really good feeling to be like I figured out on my own what this grammar thing was and replicated it correctly, and that just was good for motivation, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think your appreciation of the process of learning ultimately outweighed any difficulty that, the average, that pretty much anyone studying a language encounters, right?
I guess I'm trying to think of how to say this properly. It's not in my understanding, like language isn't difficulty is such a broad term. I'm trying to
It
think
is.
how to say it. For example,
And
recently
it's relative.
Yeah. It's definitely relative. Don't listen to anyone who tells you that like language A is harder than language B.
Not at
It's
all,
completely
no.
dependent on the person. But recently, like literally this month, I started trying to learn the guitar. That is something that I think is physically difficult. Like the way you have to coordinate your hands and fingers is actually difficult.
Yeah.
Learning a language doesn't have that. The difficulty is mainly the time commitment, I think.
Right.
Like, it's not that it's so difficult to learn a new thing or progress. It's just that it takes much more time than I think a lot of people realize before starting.
Yeah. Well, I think, I guess the only comparison that I can make in terms of like physical difficulty might be if you encounter a completely different like sound, I guess, like phoneme, I guess you'd say, but like some new kind of, I guess you could even compare it to like tone in like Mandarin, like producing the right thing. I guess that's kind of physically intonation, physically
Yeah,
challenging,
yeah,
or
yeah.
like a click language, right? Like, we're not
Those are
used to
kind of rare,
producing.
but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, those are like physically challenging. Like
Yeah,
you're just
yeah.
not used to doing that. But the vast majority, of Japanese, I think overlaps with English. It's just actually
Yeah,
there's less sounds. There's less. So in that respect, it's easier in a way.
yeah, if you are someone who's never studied anything Japanese,
Hmm.
there's only maybe two sounds Japanese has that English doesn't. Neither one's
Hmm.
particularly difficult to learn though.
Hmm.
Mostly it just has fewer sounds. Japanese actually has shockingly few sounds compared to the languages of the world.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So,
So, may I ask you, what did you think it was very difficult at the beginning?
so I that's a really tricky question. But so in terms of the sound structure and all that, like no problem at all. Like I
Yeah.
already spoke Spanish. Like to me immediately,
Yeah, the
like
vowels are
it's
basically the
just
same thing as
yeah,
Spanish.
vowels the same, consonants pretty much the same. Like so, yeah, no problem there. Like that was never a thing. Uh, Now in terms of just getting very basic information across, like like Japanese is a very forgiving language compared to English. Like you can just kind of throw a bunch of
Yes.
stuff at people and it gets across.
Not only can
Uh,
you, that's basically how it
that
works.
is like casual conversation. You end up getting rid of a lot of the grammatical stuff. So, but I think for me, the biggest challenge and something that I didn't even really get to until maybe my second, third year in university when I was studying it was learning to think of Japanese as its own thing, right? As its own language, learning to think in Japanese
Mm.
and not like trying to translate, not trying to, approach it from the English perspective first.
I agree completely with that. I think that's many people's first big hurdle is
Hmm.
I'm going to make them nameless, but I've known some people who've been studying Japanese for quite a while now
Hmm.
and still clearly are thinking in English then translating to Japanese,
Hmm.
which for one slows down your Japanese and makes kind of unnatural
Yeah.
Japanese that's usually more complicated than actual natural Japanese would
Yeah.
be. I don't know if I have a tip for that except don't think in English.
Yeah. So I do kind of have a tip for that, but
Oh, cool.
I will just say that uh, that is just absolutely natural, and I still have moments where I run into things that as I'm talking, I hit a wall and I go like, oh, I've never had to say this in Japanese.
Mm.
I'm not sure how to say it. So then I end up coming up with either something that sounds unnatural because I just kind of pieced it together in Japanese, or I have to like revert back to English and think about how I would say it in English or Spanish or whatever. And so maybe, I make those kind of weird mistakes. And that's just natural. I mean, like, we are not native speakers of Japanese, and that stuff
Yeah.
just will always happen. But my tip for that is that something that I started doing when I really got serious about Japanese is having basically like talking to myself in Japanese in my head. And so I
I
would
have
go
done that
through,
as well.
yeah, I would go through conversations. I would imagine, okay, so I'm going to meet this person. And sometimes like I know I'm actually going to meet a real person and I think about what kind of person they are and what our conversation is going to be like. And so I think, oh, so I'm probably going to end up saying, hello, nice to meet you. And I'll do my self-introduction, whatever. And then the person is going to respond. And then I think about what I'm going to say in response to their response. And then, I kind of try to go through several turns, I guess, conversation turns, and try to predict what they're going to say and have something that I think sounds natural ready to go. And the more I would do that, the further into the conversation that I would be able to get without having too
Mm.
much trouble, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also like just come up with scenarios too, like think, oh, I'm going to go to the soccer club today, so obviously there's going to be certain things that I'm going to be asked. What might these things be and what might my response be, right? So
Yeah.
you try to have these responses at the beginning. They're kind of like set phrases, but the more you do this, the more natural and the more ingrained in you they become, and then
Mm.
you're able to put these phrases out there and tweak them in a more natural way as the more you interact with people.
Yeah, I definitely agree completely with that.
Hmm.
Once you started explaining, I realized I have also like when listening to others or imagining talking to others, trying to predict what others will say. is a good training, I think.
Yeah.
If you predict exactly what they say, then good job, you understand how they're thinking.
Yeah.
If not, you can see how like a natural way to say something might differ from the way you were planning to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. And pretty soon you get like really good at the basic stuff that you're going to have to say with pretty much everyone, right? Like
Yeah.
it just becomes super easy. And then that means you can concentrate on the more like elaborate or unexpected stuff.
Yeah.
And then like when you do find something that you didn't know, like something that I would do, and it's hard to do because you forget unless you have like, I mean, you can write it on your phone, I guess, or have a notepad. But I would go home. When I would go home, I would try to look up whatever it is that they would tell me and make a note of it so that I would have that ready for the next time that comes up, right? Hey, just a quick note. So the latest episode of my other podcast, Japan Station, is all about the Japanese intelligence community and the history of espionage. So yeah, it's a really interesting conversation with Dr. Richard Samuels, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. And I learned quite a bit from, well, reading his book called Special Duty and talking to him. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely go check that out. You can go to japanstationpodcast.com or just check out the show notes because I'm going to include a link there. And of course, you can also just go wherever you get your podcasts, look up Japan Station. Another thing that I found useful, and this, I guess you would be if for anybody that's interested in Japanese media in general, whether it's anime or dramas or movies or music, whenever something that you don't know comes up, just look it up, make a note of it, and you can do it in a Word file. You can do it in like, there's this program called Anki, and there's tons of apps too that, help you remember vocabulary and all that. So what I liked about this is I would start an anime series, and usually you notice that a lot of the same words keep coming up. So if you're watching a show about soccer, you're going to learn how to talk about soccer. And usually, let's say the first episode, you're stopping every minute or so to look up something. But by the fifth episode, if you're diligently doing this, you already know those like same, I don't know, maybe 50 words that are coming up. And then you can focus on other words and keep learning. And those other words are probably going to be either more specialized or just general, common, everyday stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I particularly enjoyed that. I did that with several anime series before I started feeling like, oh, my Japanese is getting a bit more natural and I'm able to have, longer conversations.
Yeah, I also agree very much with that. For myself, earlier when I started trying to actually read like novels and stuff in Japanese, I guess for a while when I was a beginner at Japanese, I had this assumption that you would just sort of like naturally pick up kanji. That does not happen.
Yeah.
Be aware of that. At some point, I think you are going to have to like force yourself through something, whether it's an anime series, a drama, or manga, or book.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to look up lots of words.
Yeah.
My advice is, if you look up literally every unknown word, it becomes kind of tedious and troublesome.
Oh my God, that's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, so don't do that. Whatever words are repeated or seem important or that you can't understand the context or what's going on without that word, look those words up.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of just like adjectives and adverbs that aren't really that important to the overall meaning.
Yeah.
So you can just sort of like, okay, he said this word in this place, whatever, move on. And if you continue this enough, eventually through seeing it in context over and over and over and understanding the other words around it, you can kind of form an idea of what those words mean without ever looking them up too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess I kind of just did that. So we just recorded the Japanese intestines episode. So if you haven't listened to that, go listen to that. But
Intestine party.
Yeah, intestine party. So I had to scan through a Japanese medical research paper.
I've never even tried reading medical journals in Japanese.
Yeah. So obviously, like reading a medical journal in English is usually, unless you're into that sort of thing, it's going to be boring and difficult and you're not going to understand everything because it's just very specialized wording and vocabulary. Same applies to Japanese language, but I was able to scan through most of it and get the general idea, and the kanji that kept popping up that seemed important, I just, looked those up in the dictionary. And so I got enough to get the general gist of what I needed to get from that article. But yeah, like you said, if you're stopping at every single kanji, you're going to get tired before you make any real progress, and it's just a frustrating experience.
It's a difficult balance because you definitely need to actually put the effort in to look up the words that are important. Mm-hmm. But if you try to look up every little thing, you're not going to be able to continue. It needs to still be enjoyable or interesting on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, if you're passionate about anime, if you're passionate about movies, about Haruki Murakami or whatever, going to those sources and trying to understand it in the native language, I think that's an extra bit of motivation that you can get.
I think that would be my biggest advice, actually, would be to do things you enjoy doing in Japanese.
I agree, yeah.
So for me, my main hobby of my entire life has been video games. Mm-hmm. So when probably around 8 years ago, I started just playing Japanese role-playing games because I love role-playing games and they tend to have the most language in Japanese.
Yeah.
And I started with like Famicom, Super Famicom games because they are aimed at a little younger audiences, easier Japanese. But it was a great thing because you can see lots of words. Sometimes I learned very specialized fantasy words that you don't really need in everyday life. But hey, you can surprise people by knowing it.
Yeah. That's also fun.
And because I like games, it's still fun to play. There's gameplay elements where you can just like take a break and not need to worry about what's happening with the language. And then there's story things where you get to focus again on learning new kanji, new words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think... I can't remember which papers it is, but I'm sure we've both read these in the pedagogy classes that we've taken. But language is basically a tool, right? And when you're able to get people to use it as a tool rather than this like contextless collection of sounds, you're more likely...
As a syntactician, I enjoy that too.
Yeah.
Well, but I understand no one else does.
Yeah. But that's looking at language in a whole different way, not for language learning, right?
Yeah.
But when you're able to get people to use language as a tool, then you're making all sorts of connections in the brain, right? So, next time, and that goes also like connects to mistakes, right? If you make a mistake, you're making a connection to that specific incident where you did something embarrassing, and now the last time that I said this happened, therefore I should not say it this way, I should say it this way, right?
That is the best way to remember a new word, is to make an embarrassing mistake with it.
Yeah, you don't forget that, yeah. And if you're able to laugh about it, then even better, right? So
it's been like a decade. I can still remember where I said yuenchi instead of yochien, and someone burst out laughing at me.
Okay, so yuenchi is like a theme park, like an amusement park. Yeah, and then was it
Yochien?
Yochien, thank you. There, you got me all confused. Yochien is like nursery school, kindergarten.
Yeah. So I think I was trying to say like when I was in kindergarten I did something, but I ended up saying when I was at amusement park I did something. And my Japanese friend literally just burst out laughing for a long time too.
Yeah, so those are particularly powerful memories that help you, like, oh, now you won't make that mistake. Or, if you're doing a martial art, and you want to, like, say something, you learn that you have to say it this way, and then that helps reinforce it, right? That, like, two things, the physical aspect of it and the just wanting to say it, all these things just come together to help you remember things.
Yeah, I think for both of us, it was largely video games and anime stuff, but it can be anything. Yeah. I've had friends who took cooking classes in Japanese, do martial arts in Japanese. It doesn't even have to be a Japanese thing. Like I mentioned recently, I started learning guitar and my teacher's Japanese. And before guitar, I had zero experience with music whatsoever. So now I'm learning a whole bunch of music terms that I actually don't even know in English in Japanese.
Yeah. No, that's really fun. Like, sometimes you end up learning stuff that you just don't know in your own native language, and it's just fun, right?
And fortunately, I think many viewers might be feeling like it's difficult to do that if you're outside of Japan. Just like in English, there's lots of tutorial videos for things in Japanese on YouTube.
Absolutely.
You can look up cooking videos, you can look up music videos, you can look up pretty much anything.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can find it. And if you're curious about how you say something, if you love cooking, you can look up that stuff on cooking. So, yeah.
You might also get to learn some good Japanese recipes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the good thing about doing something you like, right? You're learning two things at the same time.
And again, I'll stress, it doesn't have to be a Japanese thing. You could look up like, I don't know, a burrito recipe in Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, it's difficult at the beginning, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Right? You just gotta
It
have to keep at
is
it.
the beginning is the hardest part. After that, it gets easier and easier and more exciting because you start to feel good when you can understand things you couldn't before.
Yeah. Anything else you can think of that was particularly helpful to you relating to Japanese or, I don't know, kanji or anything?
Kanji. Okay. Related to kanji,
Yeah.
the best advice I can give, probably for learning languages overall, is figure out what is the most effective way for you personally, because I do believe there's a lot of variation depending on how people can learn things.
Yeah.
For example, with kanji, I have a lot of friends who like to use flashcard type apps on their cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
For me, those do not work at all. I need to have context or else it just floats out of my mind instantly.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, I kind of want to bring this up. So I think many people are like me and you, where lack of context makes it not useful. But I think there's a large number of people who still want to feel like they're studying. So they do like 20, 30 minutes a day of flashcards. That might not be an efficient way to study for them. It definitely can be for some people. I know that.
I've done that too. And it does help. But ultimately,
it's not zero. It's not
the
nothing.
things that always resonate with me more is when I learn something in context.
Yeah, if you're like reading a newspaper article or a book and you see some word in the context it's designed to be used in, it's more memorable than when it's just on a blank white screen with like a 1 or 2 word definition.
Yeah. I mean, just through the articles that I write on Japankyo, I've gotten very good at reading like articles about somebody getting arrested for something stupid. So usually it's the same kind of kanji that come up, taiho or whatever,
Yeah. I try to read at least one article in Japanese every day, and because of the Hong Kong protest, I've been learning a whole bunch about like political resistances and arrests and Molotov cocktail.
Yeah. Oh, how do you say that in Japanese? Do you know?
I think it's hoenbin? Kaenbin.
Oh, yeah, I've heard
Sorry,
that. Yeah. Yeah, but see, you forget when you don't hear. That's not something that comes up normally.
Actually, I feel like it's very unlikely you'd have a flashcard for Molotov cocktail, but it is a real word that does come up occasionally.
Yeah.
The Hong Kong protests are big news all around the world and in Japan too.
Yeah. In terms of kanji also, look, kanji is my weakest point. I completely admit that. But I think generally I'm able to get the gist of something either purely out of context or because I've seen the kanji before and I kind of know what it's referring to, even though I don't know exactly how it's read. And that's perfectly fine. I think you can, work out the details and the pronunciation later on.
I was going to say that too. Like, don't obsess over every aspect of every kanji. Just some of them are such low frequency that it's unnecessary. Natives don't know like the different readings of some of them.
Yeah. And I'll fully admit I don't write kanji. Like I can write like a baby, probably like some very simple ones, but I don't bother with that. I just type.
Yeah, that's actually something Japanese people think is a problem in Japan now is because word processors and keyboards, more and more young Japanese can't write well. They're still generally way better than learners because they're forced to do it through high school. But I think like after high school, they pretty much never handwrite anything anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm almost afraid to say this, but according to standardized testing, I think kanji is one of my strengths compared to other learners. But I'm definitely not good at writing them.
Right. Yeah, and
I think I acquired them just through reading lots of things in context: video game, newspapers, books.
Yeah. I mean, really,
I will mention there is an order. Newspapers are very hard if you're a beginner. I would recommend, if you like video games, old video games are easy. If not, manga aimed at like elementary school kids are pretty good. I think Dragon Ball is actually a really good first one if you want to have something that's easy to read.
Yeah, I know in old video games, there's a lot more hiragana too, right? Like they don't really use that much kanji.
And some of the Final Fantasies, at least the handheld ones, they often let you choose if you want it to be all hiragana or with kanji.
Yeah, and
I would recommend always picking with kanji anyway, just to learn it.
I think
it's also hard to read if it's all hiragana.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, it might be useful at the beginning, but eventually you really do need to make the switch because when you get used to proper Japanese, it's so much easier to read it that way because hiragana just runs into each
Yes.
other, and you go like, where does it start? Where does it stop? And yeah,
Yeah, they don't really put spaces between
yeah,
words. Sometimes, if it's aimed at kids and it's all hiragana, they will put
hmm,
spaces. But the spaces might not be in places you would expect them to be,
right,
which can be also confusing
yeah, 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 yeah,
because there's not actually like a formal system for how to do that since it's traditionally not using spacing in Japanese.
right. All right. Anything else you can think of?
General advice would just be expose yourself to stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Try to daily, like if you're outside of Japan, try to daily watch something on YouTube or something. Try to talk with your, if you are in a class, make the effort to speak with your classmates in Japanese.
Yeah,
Don't just switch back to English when the teacher's not looking.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I think one of the most important things is daily, like really making an
Yeah.
effort to, uh,
If you're alone, talk to yourself in Japanese. Narrate your day.
yeah, 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 exactly. Like I didn't notice.
My first thought every morning is okitakunai.
I don't want to get up.
And then the next is shigoto ni ikitakunai.
しょうがないな。So, yeah, I didn't notice a significant change in my ability to like have conversation until I said it was right before I studied abroad, and that was not long after I had taken a trip to Japan for the first time and realized, okay, what I know is not enough to really have a conversation. I should either give up
Yeah.
now or like get serious about this. So, not long after that, I decided I'm going to study abroad. And in the months leading up to that study abroad, I decided I'm going to study Japanese every single day. And I got a textbook. It was Genki. People might be familiar with Genki.
I had Genki.
I didn't use it in my Japanese classes, but by the time that I was about to study abroad, that textbook had been adopted in the Japanese curriculum at the university. So I just decided to get it, and I got it. And I went from page 1 all the way through the end of book 2, every day, just little by little, as I was also like looking up stuff from the anime that I was watching and making lists and kanji and all that stuff. And every single day I made it a point to do that. And by the time I got to Japan, I felt comfortable enough to have like pretty like basic conversations, but I wasn't like, in a having horrible difficulty like getting what I wanted to say across to people. Like it was enjoyable to actually communicate with people. And I think that, had I not done that, by the time I got to the study abroad program, like I would have been, far more basic. And like I would not have been able to make friends as easily either.
Yeah. As I said earlier, it's a very time-consuming process. Don't listen to any of those books. It's like master Japanese in 60 days.
Yeah.
That's just not possible. And I don't want to like sound like I'm criticizing most university programs, but because they're not made for people they're made for general audiences essentially, not for people who are planning to actually go live in Japan. So if you only do that, you will improve and learn more.
Yeah.
But if you actually want to get to the point where you can have conversations and make friends easily, it's going to take a lot of extra work on your own.
Yeah, I mean the average person, like that is not some sort of super language genius. Like you do have to put in your own time, like outside of class, right? Class is fun, and I always loved Japanese class. I loved my Japanese teacher, especially the one in university.
Yeah, me too.
She was wonderful, and I think that motivates you.
Oh yeah, mine was better.
Oh well, I don't know about that. I think mine was better. Anyway, she was just a wonderful lady, and I still occasionally keep in touch with her. I've emailed her and stuff, but yeah, you do get that satisfaction out of the class, but if you really do want to get to that point where you can use the language, then you do have to put that extra bit of effort outside of class. And if you do get to that point, it's a wonderful thing to be able to actually communicate in Japanese with actual Japanese people and consume the media and get all those little nuances that often get lost in whether it's a dub or a subtitle or whatever. It's like I translate stuff every once in a while too. It's impossible to get every single idea across because it works the same way when you translate English into whatever other language. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
You can only do so much, but when you are able to consume it in the native language, in the language that it was originally done, it's really fun. It's really, really fun. And I something that I would do, I had the DVD set of Cowboy Bebop, and I would, when I first watched Cowboy Bebop, I couldn't understand what was being said. Every so often I'd rewatch episode 1. and see like how much progress I was making. After a few years, I eventually got to the point like, I understand everything they're saying now. Yeah, so it's really fun. It's really, really fun. But yes, if you do have to put in the time.
Kind of a tangent.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious because I had a similar experience
Yeah.
with various video games I played or music I listened
Yeah.
to. I wasn't so much of an anime person
Mhm.
that I heard before any of my Japanese education started. I could like repeat what they like. For example, in fighting games, they would just like shout out their
Right, right.
moves, and I could repeat their move, but it was just like a meaningless sound to
Yeah.
me. And then years later, after learning Japanese, I go back and like I understand everything they're saying to me. Yet somehow it still simultaneously sounds like just a sound.
Well, yeah, I guess you get conditioned into just, yeah, it's like a sound effect.
Yeah, do whatever works for you. Don't give up. The reason I'm trying to stress the length of time is not to make it sound intimidating, but to make so that people, if you feel like you're making like no progress or it's too hard, that's normal.
Exactly.
It takes a long time. If you are like 2 or 3 years in, you still can't talk to people. That's normal.
Not rare
Don't
at all.
worry about
Yeah,
that.
that was me too. That was absolutely me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's totally normal.
Yeah. I don't think I could actually converse with someone in Japanese until maybe 1 year of living in Japan, which is probably like my 5th year of Japanese study.
Mhm.
And even then, they needed to like make affordances to me where they would speak a little slower, a little clearer, and not use slang.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but it's extremely rewarding, and I love that I can communicate in Japanese, and then I like when I studied abroad, I made it a point. I'm going to email my friends only in Japanese. I'm not going to resort to English. So, and
Yeah, that's good
from
too.
there you just that reminded me too. Like writing is really important, and one thing that I really liked is this website called Lang 8. You can look it up. I'll include a link. But you can write whatever you want, and people, will correct it for you, like native Japanese speakers. And you get, maybe sometimes they'll do a funky correction or whatever. But for the most part, you get some really valuable insight into, how you should phrase things. So I used that for a while. I was running like a Japanese language blog, and it was fun. It was very fun. So that's another good thing.
Oh, a similar, since we're like giving recommendations, something a friend recommended to me a couple years ago. There is an app for smartphones called, I keep calling them smartphones because in Japan you can never just say cell phone,
Yeah.
called Hello Talk. Have you heard of that?
Hello Talk. Hello Talk. I don't remember that.
It's you can just search Hello Talk. I believe it's on Google and iPhone stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is basically a text messaging service like WhatsApp or Line
Mm-hmm.
that will pair you with someone who's trying to learn the language you speak, who speaks the language you want to learn.
Yeah. That's
So when
great.
you make an account, you'll say like, I speak English, I want to learn Japanese.
Mhm.
And it'll pair you with people,
Yeah.
usually in Japan, but they could be anywhere in the world, who speak Japanese and want to learn English. And it will give you information like what their English level is, what the Japanese level is. And you can basically just chat with them, ask questions. There's also like public posting places you can do too.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to make friends and
I think
practice using
so.
the language.
Yeah. I've done like some pen pal kind of stuff, and that's always useful. You do have to, again, make it a point. Don't just, if the other person is better at you than English, is better
Yeah.
at you speaking English than you are at Japanese, you have to make that effort not to like lose, I guess you could say, right? Because it's so
Yeah.
easy to just give up and like, oh, I can talk to them in English. No, but you have to make that point. Like, even if it's crappy Japanese, like, say it, and then maybe they'll help you, they'll fix it, and then both of you can help each other.
Yeah, but talking with a native is possibly the best thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I remember back when I was a beginner, before any of this stuff existed, I just got a Yahoo Japan Messenger account.
Yeah.
And they would have like chat rooms for like Japanese people trying to learn English. And I would just, in as broken Japanese as I could, try to make friends, talk with them. They'd correct my errors, I'd correct their errors.
Yeah.
And that's also useful because most textbooks teach
Yeah.
very newscastery Japanese.
Yeah. They don't teach like usually what you actually hear, what you're going to be speaking with your friends.
It is useful. It's the Japanese that is natural if it's a stranger talking to a stranger.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, if you enter Japan, you're probably a stranger to everyone, so
Mhm.
it is what you'll be using initially.
Yeah.
But when you make friends and it becomes more casual, it's considerably different. And it's
Yeah.
good to be able to expose yourself to that stuff too before you actually make a friend.
Yeah. I agree.
Or else you're going to sound awkwardly formal with your friend.
Yeah. You come off as like distant and weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, we could find some more stuff to talk about, but I think that's some pretty good general stuff. Anything else you want to add? Anything we missed, you think?
Study Japanese. It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's totally fun. Yeah, and I need to.
If you've never studied Japanese, I would recommend it. As I've mentioned, some people like to say that language A is harder than language B, and for whatever reason, a lot of Westerners think Japanese is like a super hard language.
Mhm.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's like normal.
So this is just how I view it. I don't know, everybody's different and perhaps other people have other insights into it. But Japanese is difficult in that it's so different from English. And so you have to kind of break your brain to start comprehending it. And once you comprehend it, once you realize what's going on, then you realize this is actually like fairly simple. And I don't mean that in any sort of condescending way. I mean,
No, it is actually simple.
yeah, it's like simple compared to the more complex grammar of other languages. Like I think Russian is supposed to be ridiculously complex, but Japanese, like you don't have to say the subject most of the time. Oftentimes
Yeah.
you can just throw a couple words together and that's absolutely natural, right? Like you can get points across, in relatively simply but it's our tendency as speakers of English to always say things a certain way. I did this, but
Yeah.
you don't have to do it that way. And getting used to that is, I think, the tricky part.
Yes.
Mhm.
Getting used to the fact that it's simpler than you expect it to be.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, I'll bring up, we both are linguists. My
Mhm.
specialty was syntax.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean it's easy, but relative to other languages, Japanese grammar is shockingly simple.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have lots of the complicated grammar forms other languages have.
Mhm.
And although at the beginning, fundamentally, it looks different, I think for most people that's actually an advantage.
Mhm.
As mentioned in my experience with Spanish, my teachers always encouraged us to think in English and use English, which works with the very, very elementary stuff. But as you become more and more advanced, it ends up sabotaging you because ultimately Spanish is not English.
Yeah.
So understanding how to think outside your native language earlier just means later on you will have less issues.
Yeah. Yep. You just have to learn it as Japanese. Try not to compare it. Yeah.
The most difficult thing definitely is learning the kanji,
Mm-hmm.
which you should try to learn. However, I know people who have, one of my friends, actually my Spanish teacher, has lived in Japan now for I think over 20 years. He's married to a woman who only speaks Japanese, not English or Spanish. His daughter only speaks Japanese and a little Spanish. He can't read kanji at all. But otherwise, he's basically a native speaker.
Yeah.
He's not a native, but his Japanese is native level, and he's functioning perfectly fine in Japan.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I encourage you to learn kanji, but if you think it's too hard or it's not what you're interested in,
Yeah.
you don't have to.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm sure he knows just the very basic stuff that he does just from his daily life.
Yeah, he can read foods and go grocery
Yeah,
shopping.
exactly.
and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
but-
and you just learn that because it's in context and you see it again and again and again. But yeah, you don't really have to. You can just focus on the aspect that is most enjoyable, most rewarding to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He can go watch movies in Japanese, no issue. He can make lots of friends, no issue.
Yeah.
If you're someone who's interested in Japanese literature or manga, you definitely need to study some of it.
Yeah.
Manga doesn't use the complicated ones that much, though.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the topic
I guess it depends on the author. Some of them go a little nuts with it.
yeah. All right. I think we can leave it at that. And if we think of other stuff, we can always do another episode. Or if you have any specific questions, then you can email us at ichimon@japankyo.com. All right. So I guess 以上ですね. That's it.
以上ですね。
以上ですね. はい. All right.
では。
Okay. See you next time.
See you next time.